Welcome back everyone to another episode of the vlog. Today you guys find us at the Commerce Casino once again. Seems like you guys usually enjoy this casino, I think, or at least I do, and when I do I feel like you guys do as well. But anyways, we're going to be hopping in here shortly. Got our name on the 510 and the 1020 list. Like I said, whatever game looks better to me, I'm going to hop in and play. Anyways, not a lot to talk about really today. Just same thing as always, like I've been mentioning in all these videos. If you guys haven't already, submit a WSOP application if you guys want to come down and play one of the early events in the WSOP. Flight, all that is included. There's a link in the description down below that'll help you guys get situated. Anyways, it's my turn to get this session started, so let's head on in, run good, make some money, and hopefully, have some good news at the end of all this.
So starting off pretty quickly into today's session, I'm catching up. Like I said, I haven't even received my chips to this point, so I actually pull out the camera after the hand concludes, but I've got to let you guys know what happened. So let's get right into it. I looked down at ace king on my very first hand. Middle position decides to make it $30 off of about $130 or $150 stack. I decided to raise it to $120 when I looked down at ace king as mentioned. Obviously going to be 3-betting this almost all the time. It's just awesome when you pick up such a great hand against an opponent here. He decides to jam all in for $150. Obviously, we're going to go ahead and make the call. We're going off to a board that, luckily for us, comes king high. And if that's not enough, it's followed by another king and an ace. So, luckily for us, we make a boat, and our opponent shows pocket queens. We win a big flip here, and just like that, we're up about $150 pretty early into the session. That's always a good feeling, starting off on the right foot. Moving forward, we look down at Jack 5 offsuit. The button decides to raise to $30 here. I'm going to go ahead and defend. This is a little wider, but against the button range, who's going to be opening fairly wide, I don't mind having any Broadway cards in my defending range. Although, like I said, I would prefer this to be suited, at least at that variety. I'm going to be okay with calling here. Out of position, I decide to check it over to my opponent. On the 6-6-3 board texture, he decides to check it back. I was actually considering check raising here if he decided to bet, and the reason being is that it's very unlikely for my opponent to have a strong hand on this board texture, and I'm more likely to have the trips in my range. Anyways, when he decides to check it back, it's even easier for me when the turn comes at jack. There's no reason to bluff at this hand here. I decide to lead out a little bit larger, $40 into 60-ish, and he decides to pretty quickly make the call. We're going off to a river that comes the deuce of clubs. At this point, I'm trying to figure out what I want to bet. And I actually want to bet a little bit on the larger side. I want to bet $110. And the reason being is because I have a really strong hand here. I can definitely have some missed flush draws or some missed straight draws at this point. So I'd like to be betting a little bit larger to get those ace highs to fold. Anyways, my opponent inevitably makes the call. And luckily for us, we're going to be taking this down as we show jack with no kicker. And that's good enough to win the hand. This next hand ends up getting really, really weird. And the reason being is because we're in the blind raise for $25 here under the gun. Next to act decides to make it $110 to go. Folds all the way to me, and if I'm putting out a blind raise, and it sucks that I'm out of position, but when we looked at an ace here, I'm going to be defending 100% of the time. Ace 5 offsuit is the variety I'm using this time. I'm going to go ahead and make the call here. We're going to be going off to a flop that comes Queen 5 10. There are two spades out there. I'm not holding a spade. I decide to check it over to my opponent, who decides to c-bet for $200, which is a pretty big sizing here. Should be going off alarm bells here. I probably should consider folding, but I end up doing the opposite. I decide to make the call. That's a little better than going all in, though. So we're going off to a turn card, hoping to improve in some fashion with an ace or a 5 of some sort, and possibly stack my opponent and maybe cooler him. Anyways, the turn card comes a queen. This is where things get even more interesting. In my head at the time, I'm believing that this is a card that's significantly better for my range than his. If he's going to be raising from early position, the only real hands that we can give him credit for are probably ace-queen, king-queen, and pocket queens. So there's not a whole lot of combinations of cards that improve on this turn card. I believe that I can get a better hand to fold that would be like pocket tens, pocket jacks, possibly kings and aces. At least that's what I'm thinking. At least that's what I'm thinking at the time. I don't know if my logic makes any sense. This is a really weird spot to be in. The one thing that I can give myself credit for is that I don't feel like there's a ton of bluffs in my range here. And obviously that I'm holding a 5. It's nice that I can kind of discredit him from having a full house like pocket 5s. And luckily, just due to the ranges here being a little more narrow, I just don't think my opponent's going to have a hand as weak as Queen Jack or Queen 10 in his holdings here. And if that's the case, I want to go ahead and lead jam. which is what I end up doing. I decided to jam for what is around $600 or $700 effective. That is my opponent's remaining stack. He goes deep into the tank, and I mean really deep into the tank, like over 2 minutes before he ends up deciding to make the fold. So luckily we get that through, and he immediately asks me what I have. I tell him that I just had a pretty weak pair. He seems pretty disappointed with the fact that he folded a better hand. To be quite honest, things to this point have been okay. I can't really condone all of my plays, to be honest, but I think for the most part we've been doing all right. In this next hand, under the gun decides to blind raise to $25. The button and the small blind decide to limp here. I'm going to go ahead and just make the completion by throwing out $15 to indicate a call. And we're going off to a flop that's pretty favorable for us as it comes ace, jack, 5, rainbow. Flopping top pair, I could see a lot of merit in leading here because this has been limped 4 ways. But I'd prefer to use a hand with a weaker kicker like this to be a check call and play turns and different runouts accordingly. Checks over to the button actually, who decides to throw out a bet of $50, going about half the size of the pot. Folds to me. I'm going to go ahead and be calling here. Can't be doing anything else. I think that'd be overplaying my hand. Everyone else decides to fold, and we're going off to a turn card that comes a king. Luckily, the action checks through here. I didn't want to face a big barrel because that would not be fun. When we go off to a river that comes a 6, I think at this point, I have to go for some sort of thin value. It does suck that I'm going to be targeting specifically a hand like King Queen or King 10 or Jack Queen, but I think there's just too many options out there for me not to go for some form of value. And of course, I can be value owning myself, and that is a possibility, but I think with a hand like ours, we've got to go for some semblance of value. Ace deuce, ace 3, ace 4, ace 6, ace 7, all these hands are still going to be trying to pay us off. If that's the case, we've got to make some money off them, right? So I decide to bet $80, and my opponent thinks about it for quite some time before deciding to make the call. We show our hand, and luckily it is good. As we said here, we've been going pretty thin on these river spots, and it's worked out well in our favor. Luckily for us, the session has been going off to the right start. All right, folks, well, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a spoiler. Things get off the rail here, and I think really derailed me from what was a pretty decent session. But again, there's no reason to go too far and foreshadow too much. But in this next hand, under the gun OMC decides to limp here. I decide to make it $55 from the cutoff. It folds back over to the under the gun position, who decides to make the call. And we're going off to this flop that comes absolutely amazing. It comes Jack 10 deuce with 2 clubs and a spade. The opposition decides to check it over to me. I'm going to go ahead and c-bet here for about half the size of the pot. Seems pretty reasonable catch-all sizing. I make it $60, and to my surprise, my opponent does not just call, and he doesn't fold. He decides to raise. But he doesn't raise to like $120 or $200 or even $300 or even $400. My opponent decides to raise to $600. Like, maybe I've been a fool for falling for this too many times in the past, but this is just insane. Like, what bluffs do, like, OMCs have in this range? I don't know, maybe, like, King, Queen of clubs, I guess, but it's just too much to, like, gamble my entire stack, and I know I have top pair with the best kicker, but it just seems insane against this exact player type to go broke. So I tank for over 1 minute, trying to talk myself into making a call, but I just can't. I can't do it. I end up making the fold, and we'll never know what my opponent has here, but I am pretty happy with my fold after all. I think I am, at least. Well, let's see if things can't get any more derailed from a session than it already has. Middle position limps. I decide to look at pocket eights and limp as well. I guess I couldn't decide to look at my hand. I mean, I guess I can. Anyways, the button decides to isolate here to $80. I decide to make the call. We're going off to a flop that comes 9 deuce deuce. I decide to check it over to my opponent, who decides to c-bet pretty small here for $50. Can't be folding my 2 pair at this point. It'd be a little too nitty. And when the turn card comes a jack of hearts, it does bring a backdoor flush draw out there. I decide to check. My opponent goes pretty large here as he decides to bet $200. Nearly the size of the pot. Things are a little more worrisome now, but it's just hard to see the jack interacting with my opponent's range. Sure, he can have a hand like Queen Jack, Ace Jack, King Jack. Those do exist. I don't want to discredit them completely. But I think in reality, I think he's going to be barreling a ton with his ace highs and some hands that pick up equity like maybe Queen 10, King 10, and all his flush draws. I end up making the call and we're off to a river that comes another jack. This now is a really interesting spot where I think I can be mixing in some leads. And by leading, I mean pretty much throwing out a blocker bet. So after a little bit of time, I actually decide to lead out for $50. And again, the reason I'm doing this is because I don't want to face a really large bet against my opponent. And I feel like if he raises this, he's making his range significantly more narrow than it would have been if I just check and have to face a bet. After quite a bit of pause, my opponent ends up not calling and not folding. He decides to raise to $300. This is a really sick spot here. It's just, for me, in my opinion at the time, really hard for my opponent to raise this river without specifically a jack. I think that to raise this river for this specific sizing, I feel like you would have to have some form of a jack. And if that's the case and his range is as narrow as it is, I think my hand is less important. I don't correlate with the board much. I don't hold a spade. I'm not blocking very many of the credible straight draws that were there on the turn. So when that's the case, I end up making the call, and my opponent shows 10-8 for a missed straight draw, but it was a 10-8 of spades, so he hit the flush. Flush there on the river for my opponent. I honestly didn't see that. I didn't notice it. It didn't come out there. That was a very interesting turn of events, I think I'd say. Moving along, looking to finally bounce back. A couple of weird hands in a row. My mind's, I think, a little flustered, and as I'll mention later on in the video, I'm feeling a little anxious. My anxiety's kicking in a little hard. Hate to make excuses, you know. Kobe wouldn't make an excuse, but, you know, I'm only human. Under the gun decides to raise to $30. I'm on the button with ace-6 suited. I like putting these hands into 3-bets sometimes, so I decided to 3-bet here to $105. The small blind was actually 3-betting out a turn, which is the whole reason this hand gets really quirky. He was trying to 3-bet, but didn't see me grabbing my chips to 3-bet. He was just like so focused on his own hand. But he ends up just flat calling. He doesn't 4-bet me. Under the gun decides to call as well, and we're going in a really weird situation to a flop 3 ways that comes king 6-5 rainbow. We do flop a pair here, which is nice. Middle pair is always delicious. The good thing is that we have a backdoor flush draw to bail us out if we need to. The bad news is we've got to this flop 3 ways. The one more good news is we are in position. When the opposition decides to check to me, I decide to c-bet here as equity denial, as I think that a lot of hands that can be better than me, like queen jack, queen 10, random overcards, I don't want to let them get there for free. So I'm betting for equity denial as well as a little bit of value. The weird part is now the small blind decides to throw in that raise, or the spring, the trap, I suppose, as he decides to raise to $325. This is a really weird situation. What I can gauge from the player on my left is that he's obviously not a professional, and this is where I think things get a little murky for me. I don't know how to react to this situation. The good thing is that I do have the ace here, so I think it'd be a little too nitty to fold. I end up making the call, and we're going off to a turn card that comes the 9 of clubs. So now we add some extra equity here, as we now have a flush draw. Well, my opponent decides to jam here for $1,000, $995 to be exact. I go deep into the tank as I'm trying to count my equity, and it's just such a close spot here. Obviously, we have a pair, and maybe our ace is live as well, but there's a chance that my opponent can have a set of some sort. But the issue had become for me is that because he didn't 4-bet 3-flop, I don't think he can have kings. But because he was trying to 3-bet pre-flop, he can have a hand like maybe king-queen, I guess. But I just don't know if a recreational player is, you know, going to be strong enough or capable enough to be 3-betting a hand like king-queen suited or king-queen offsuit. So that leaves myself in a weird situation as to, like, what value hands can he have? And I think his value range becomes super weak. And again, I think I'm just leveling myself with everything that's going on. And after a really long pause, I'm in the tank for almost 2 minutes. This is the longest tank I've ever had in live poker, probably. I end up making the call. Again, I don't want to go too far ahead of myself, but the reason all this was going on was that I realized that I have a flush draw here, but because the jam is so massive, and it's over the size of the pot, I do have to think about it, and that's what I end up doing, is making the call. My opponent asked me if I have a strong hand. I told him that I'm drawing here as well as having a pair. He seems pretty worried, actually. The river ends up breaking out for us. We don't improve in any way, and my opponent shows ace-king of hearts, so that makes sense. I still think that should have been a 4-bet pre-flop, but I mean, to be quite honest, it was a really poorly played hand for myself, and I just didn't deserve to get bailed out, I don't think, this time. In this next hand, we look down at ace-king offsuit. I decided to raise to $35. The middle position player, the hijack, the cutoff, the small blind, and the big blind all make the call. We're going 6 ways to a flop that comes queen, 10, deuce. It checks over to me here, and this is just a spot where I should just be checking and giving up. It's unfortunate that I am the initial raiser, and we're playing so many ways post-flop, and I have to give up, but wait. Am I throwing out a bet here? I decided to throw out a bet of $60, so going pretty small here. I guess setting my own price, I suppose. We're going off to a turn card. And the more ridiculous thing is that everyone except for the big blind decides to make the call. So we're going like 4 or 5 ways to this turn card. It comes a king of clubs. So I guess maybe we might have the best hand. Not very likely, though. It checks over to me, and I decide to bet again for $220. And again, if I'm going to show the cool plays that I make, I've got to be fair to myself and to you guys, more important than anything, and show the bad plays. This is just a horrible bet. I don't know what is going on in my mind. It's almost embarrassing to share with you guys, but again, if I'm looking for the praise when I do the right things, I've got to be okay with the outcome of when I make bad plays. I don't know what this lead's completing. It's almost impossible to get called by a worse hand, but I remember at the time doing the thing that is the most dangerous thing in poker, and I was specifically saying that if somebody calls or if somebody's playing against me, they're going to have specifically a hand like King Jack. Anyways, the opponent directly to my left, the one that we mentioned in the last hand, I believe, the recreational player, ends up raising me to $500, a pretty small sizing here. And when it folds over to me, again, this is just a spot where I should be folding. This is unfortunate. But I go against my better judgment and make the call. I guess at the time I'm just saying that, hey, you know, maybe I can represent, I don't know. I honestly don't know. I have a gut shot and I have a top pair. Maybe that's enough for me to just go with. But I end up making the call. And we're going off to a river that comes to 9 of diamonds. It does change the board texture now as that a jack makes a straight, as there's a 4-liner out there. And when it starts off with me, I think it's a great idea to just jam. I guess. I really don't know what I'm doing here. This is an unbelievable... Like, I could have been drunk, I guess, at this point, I suppose. But, like I said, at the very beginning of this hand, if I want all the praise when I make cool plays, I've got to be able to admit to the really bad ones, too. And that's kind of what happened here. I lead jam, which is a horrible play. Even if I get, you know, a fold here, it just doesn't make sense. I don't know what I'm doing in this hand. And, yeah. My opponent thinks about it for about like 15 seconds before making the call, and he shows the nuts. He had ace-jack, so he turned it, obviously, and yeah, man, what the hell am I doing? I want to just end it here. Let's stop talking about this hand now.
As you guys saw today, we ended up having the deadliest combination in poker, and that is running bad and playing significantly worse. So I gotta just be honest with you guys. I had, like I said, I mentioned a little bit at the mid-session update, but I had really bad anxiety. I shouldn't have played, but I forced myself to play. But it's no excuse. If I'm going to be out here, I think I got to play my best, or at least, you know, pick up the rack. And there's no shame in just going home. And, you know, I just wanted to put the hours in today, and I just, it backfired, obviously. So we were into the game for $5,000, out for a grand total of $0. Anyways, I appreciate you guys, as always, for constantly supporting the videos. Today was just a small setback. It is what it is. We've been running pretty well with how Texas went and Florida went. We were, you know, it was bound to come down. It's just unfortunate when instead of coming down because of like a little bit minus EV, which happens, you know, you come down because things aren't working out in your favor. What happened today was just playing really bad. I played my my F game today. It made probably worse, and it just makes sense that when you play your worst game, you lose money, obviously. It's almost unfair to run good even when you play bad. Bluffed into the nuts like twice, it felt like, and yeah, just didn't work out in my favor, and that's okay. Anyways, I appreciate you guys for sticking with me this long. If you guys haven't already, make sure you guys have a nice day. Stay happy, stay healthy. More importantly, run good at the tables, guys. Thank you so much for coming to another vlog. I love you guys. Have a nice day.